The beloved children's television program Sesame Street is a show so many of us grew up watching in the U.S., but it's also watched internationally in more than 30 countries. But imagine trying to start a new version of the program in Russia in the 1990s after the fall of the Soviet Union. Natasha Rogoff's new book, Muppets in Moscow, The Unexpected Crazy True Story of Making Sesame Street in Russia, tells the story of how she and a team worked to adapt Sesame Street for a Russian audience. Natasha, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
So talk to us about Ulitsa Sesam, right? You were living in Russia for several years there, working as a journalist and documentarian, not necessarily planning on children's content. So how did this idea come about?
It was an absolutely remarkable project and very ambitious. I was approached by Sesame Street's executives at the time, and the idea was that the Muppets would be the best ambassadors to bring idealistic values to post-communist Russia. But the idea really intrigued me, and you know, the prospect of working with hundreds of artists, puppeteers, musicians, writers. This was an exciting time. There was so much hope. And, you know, I thought that Sesame Street could really help in terms of modeling different values and skills that children would need to thrive in a new open society.
And you've talked about the challenge that it wasn't the same. You couldn't just bring the characters and the music and the metaphors. So how did you go about making sure that it fit appropriately in Russia?
Well, Sesame Street has international co-productions around the world. And in the case of Russia, you know, one of the first steps is to assemble a group of child education experts to determine the educational content of the show. And each show in every different country reflects the culture and values of that society. And that extends to the Muppets themselves. So that in the case of Russia, you know, our essentially Big Bird, who was an 8-foot hound-like blue furry character with leaves and moss all over his costume, came from a character out of Russian folklore called Domovoy, which is the spirit of the home and nature. Very Russian.
But the children's values, is that the same at its core from country to country when we talk about the golden rule, right? Do unto others as you would have them do. I mean, are there certain things that you could just instill in an attempt to inspire and enlighten young kids?
No, it's a great question, and one would think so. But, you know, when it's a society like Russia, where it's coming out of 70 years of communism and a completely different ideology, a completely different economic system, it would be naive to expect that you could simply transplant the American show with American values into that society. They have a different history than we did. You know, but when we talk about the values, you know, an example of that is we were all trying to come up with, you know, what should just the show teach children? And I, you know, raised my hand and said, well, what about having a scenario where they show children running a lemonade stand? You know, they would learn counting and team building skills. I thought that was pretty innocent. And that was met with complete horror, where the educators responded that that would be shameful to show children selling things on the street.
Oh, my goodness.
Because under communism, the people who would be illegally selling items on the street for profit under communism would be criminals and the mafia. I mean, it was a very intense period, not only in Russia, but for us, for our team, trying to be sensitive to help, you know, as much as we could, create a show that reflected their society, but also would promote values which would help them move a transition towards an open society.
considering all that has happened now with Russia invading Ukraine, I want to get to a quote that you concluded in your book. A colleague of yours wrote to you saying, "I have only one hope, that the generations of children who grew up on Ulica Sesame will find a way to create harmony in our country again and end this madness." Do you think that that's still possible?
I do. I mean, I saw change in my lifetime. I lived in Russia in the 1980s as a student and then as a journalist. I made films and I watched the Soviet Union collapse. That changed in my lifetime. And in addition to that, I am aware now that the people who are the 20-year-olds, late 20s, and the 30-year-olds who are now marching out of Russia because they don't want to fight, that's the Sesame Street generation. That's the Ulica Sesame generation. They all grew up loving Zeliboba. And on the Ukrainian side, same thing. That's the 20-year-olds, the same age cohort that are defending their freedom and independence that they got and built during the period of creating Ulica Sesame. Those adults now also grew up on the show.
Really fascinating stuff, Natasha. We thank you so much for joining us. Really appreciate it. And we will also want to let our viewers know her book, Muppets in Moscow, The Unexpected Crazy True Story of Making Sesame Street in Russia, is now available wherever books are sold.
Hi, everyone. George Stephanopoulos here. Thanks for checking out the ABC News YouTube channel. If you'd like to get more videos, show highlights, and watch live event coverage, click on the right over here to subscribe to our channel. And don't forget to download the ABC News app for breaking news alerts. Thanks for watching.